with a sigh that came straight from the heart. We have these sighs in one or two other parts of the Gospel, and they are moments in which the humanity of the Lord comes out. And here, as in other cases, it's the reaction because of this hardness of heart that he feels and perceives around him. What does he do in this context? He actually departs and goes to the other side. It's a fundamental law in the spiritual life that grace, repeatedly reflected, withdraws itself. And therefore it's in the interest of the soul not to harden its heart. There is one phrase in, I believe it's the commentary of St. Bede the Venerable on the Gospel of the Visitation. It's with regard to the Blessed Virgin, but then extended in general to the believer. Spiritus Sancti gratia nescit tardamonimina. The grace of the Holy Spirit knows nothing of tardy procrastinations. She goes immediately and with haste. And so it is that the soul, if it is being worked upon by grace, needs to be aware that grace is delicate. The Holy Spirit is the perfect gentleman. He will not invade. As in the case of the Blessed Virgin herself, the courtesy of heaven is seen in the attitude of the angel on bended knee, though he was an archangel, and this greeting, shalom, which comes through in English as hail, and the favour of the person before him. She is greatly magnified in this favour, and then the favour becomes her mark. We too can be favoured with graces, and if they're there, we need to be aware. It's in our own interest to keep on saying yes. The same root of favour, charis, is found in the beginning of the Gospel of St. John, and we have this phrase coming through, charis anticharitos, grace upon grace, or grace actually in return for grace, as though for the grace is accepted, another one, proportionately great, is added, and on it goes. So we can sharpen our soul to receive them and be more delicate towards them. And then there is an organism, a growth, an interchange of activity between the soul and the Holy Spirit, and the Holy Spirit is able to get through and to play upon that soul as upon a delicate and well-tuned instrument. How different that is from the hardness of heart of which the Gospel speaks. In the first reading, we have the first case of violence in history, and it's brought about by envy and jealousy. The green-eyed monster. We know that this is not just a myth, not just a legend, because in recent times the voice of the one involved has been heard. I think you know how. It's in exorcism. It happened in Germany. The case of Anneliese Michel. She was being exorcised. It was a terrible case, and they have recorded some of the human demons that were in her. So Cain was advised to admit that he was there, and in so doing, accidentally, he was indicating that he was a historic person. Therefore what we have here is something handed down from primeval history in the human family, handed on, as in Ireland, stories were told within families, as in the war. It doesn't have to be written down, but it doesn't lose its historic force for that reason. So, it's frightening. This envy led to the disease of the hardening of the heart, which led to violence, which led to the loss of the immortal soul. So no matter how long one has been dead, if one has lost one's soul, it's still as though one was just dying and all eternity was ahead. There's no shortening of the sentence. No one ever talks of it. It's not politically correct to speak of it. Don't frighten the children. Don't show you're out of date. It's just precisely what the devil does to make sure that no one ever thinks of what really matters. But in our time, the devil has managed actually to go even further. He has made it practically impossible to talk of it when preaching in public, and to say many things nowadays when preaching in public, because he has ways and means of finding somebody who will make it difficult for him. It's only often in prayer groups that one can say the whole truth. But what is happening in our time is actually even more subtle and insidious. It's become, by now, a situation of contamination, and in that of global confusion. I want to zoom into one specific area, and one only, this evening. It's the fact that we can be pretty sure that the full secret of Fatima concerned our time and concerned this problem. The personal secretary of St. John the 23rd was Archbishop Capovilla. He knew where the one sheet of the words of the Blessed Virgin was in the papal apartment. He knew that the very words were there and that it was one sheet. Sister Pasqualina also knew where it was and told the journalist of Paris Match in 1957 that it was in there. It's the big wooden personal chest of the papal apartment itself, and it's so venerable that it's called Barberigo. Now, the way in which eventually people were starting to realize that the truth of the matter was that only the sheet that went, or rather 4 sheets, the other envelope that went to the Holy Office, were the ones that were made known in 2000, became very uncomfortable for the Vatican to handle. At one point, a good Catholic journalist called Solideo Paulin talked calmly with Archbishop Capovilla, trying to pin him down. He had done his research and he knew the facts, but he wanted the Archbishop to admit it. So, talking in Italian, he said, "Dunque, ci sono 2 buste." So, there are 2 envelopes. And Archbishop Capovilla discreetly just said one phrase, "Per l'appunto," which could be translated something like, "That's it, you've got it." And that was the end of the conversation. He was discreet, but he couldn't tell a lie. So that's what Antonio Socci picked up on, as on all the other bits of the jigsaw, including the confession of the Vatican itself in the year 1960, when it made clear that probably the words of the Blessed Virgin would never be made known. There are constant references to the words. We also know that Pius XII was very concerned about the content. He knew a bit because he'd sent a good Jesuit, Father Schweigel, on his behalf as an envoy to make a calm, personal, lengthy interview with Sister Lucia in her convent. And he came back and reported discreetly, but clearly, and we have his exact words, that the third secret was in two parts. One concerned the Supreme Pontiff, and the other, and he carried on, although logically I cannot reveal its content, is the continuation of the phrase, in Portugal, the dogma of the faith will always be preserved, etc. And that etc. referred to the Church and the faith, and the crisis of the faith to come. Now, Pius XII had followed through Fatima from an early stage and had written some frightening words talking about the suicide, and that was the word he uses, of changing the liturgy and the faith of the Church, and made a strange, spirit-filled prophecy about the state of affairs that was to come, such as that the time would come when one would look in vain for the red lamp of the sanctuary. Pius XII was extremely lucid. In 1988, the Jesuit magazine Jesus made a good interview with Cardinal Ratzinger. And we know from what came out of it that he did let on, because he'd read the secret, he knew it, that the content contained these elements. We also know that he, when meeting the Filipino ambassador, Howard Dee, when the subject of the important series of events in Asia, which sort of were ongoing, but hardly completed, because the lady, I think, is still alive, Sister Agnes, that they had this to say amongst themselves. He was talking of the approval of Bishop Ito, therefore it had approval, which had then been sealed by the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith. The good inquiry made by the local bishop accepted the supernatural nature of the whole series of events in Japan, Akita, and Ratzinger said calmly to the ambassador from the Philippines, who knew all about it and they were discussing it, that the message of Fatima and that of Akita were the same. In other words, one can hear the third secret of Fatima at Akita. And what do we have? We have almost word for word what actually had been heard at the time when the third secret of Fatima was really meant to be made known in its fullness, 1960. Because at that time things started to move in Spain, it would seem, at Garabandal. And there we have this declaration, this warning from heaven, which was unthinkable at the time in rural Spain, that a situation would arise in which bishop would be against bishop and cardinal against cardinal. Well, we find practically the same expressions coming through in Akita, with things like this added, that many priests, bishops and cardinals were on the way to perdition and leading the flock with them. And that also priests who honoured her, the Blessed Virgin, would be mocked by their fellow priests, and that we would have a situation of disintegration. This is exactly what we're seeing. Now, we can understand why St. John the 23rd in 1960 would have been very hesitant to make known the content of the words. He was initiating the Second Vatican Council, and if one is going to find in a message something which is talking about the disintegration of the faith, and probably also indicating that it's going to reach the highest levels of the Church, therefore implicating precisely bishops, cardinals, and the Vatican, it's bound to cause havoc in the mental framework in which the Pope initiating the Second Vatican Council is operating. So he dismissed it, it would seem, with this, that the authenticity was not certain, and it was left there. Will the devil succeed in doing what he wanted to be able to do in 100 years, as we know from what was given to understand to Leo XIII? We know the answer actually of the Lord himself to Satan's demand at that time. You will never destroy my church. It will continue until the end of time.